just about everybody on this floor sent me a birthday card.
Yeah.
I must get along well with all the people on the floor anyway. I went with Barbara Lovett, one of the girls from Stoke, into hosteling. See, we were hosteling together, and then we went in. We both drove, so we went into Boston to the place in Boston that had square dances, and he was living in oh, where was it?
Concord.
No, he was living up there then, near in Boston. 'Cause he was
Near
working-
Bunker Hill.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and he was working up there in the Boston Navy Yard, and that's where I met him, was hosteling up there. So we met hosteling, biking.
How old were you then?
Well, I was working, so I was about 22, I guess, 20 years old, I guess.
Yeah.
And then we went every week in there, and Barbara, she met a man, but she never married him. And the next thing I knew, because Dad had a brand new gray convertible. And in those days, very few people had convertibles. And it was a gray convertible with red interior. Boy, I never owned a car, of course, of my own. I just had my mother's Model A to drive. And drive it around, locally, more or less. But we met in there, and the next thing I knew, he was coming to Stoughton, and he was meeting me at work, and we were going out. And that was the whole start of it all, and it didn't last too long before we were engaged.
Yeah.
I got my diamond at Christmas, and the next September, we got married.
What year was that?
1942. And in those days, I'm thinking of the gas situation now. Mother used to let me take the car to go to work. I worked at an ice cream stand when I was in high school. 25 cents an hour I got for pay. And every time I got some pay, I bought $1 worth of gas, 10 gallons of gas, and put in the car for my mother. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And when I started work, I was getting $12 a week, and I had to go into Boston. And I went in with a man that Everett knew. Eleanor and Everett were married then. And there was a group of men that were going in, and they picked me up at the house and took me into South Station in Boston. But I was working then in North Station, and I walked to save the 10 cents from South Station to North Station in Boston, which was a good walk. But it saved the 10-cent subway fare.
And Dad was working for the Navy Yard.
He was
then,
in the
right?
Navy Yard. Oh yes, he worked for the Navy Yard. That's why he came up there, was to work in the Navy Yard as a
World
welder.
War II was going on at that time, right?
Mm-hmm. And he got 3 calls after we were married to go into the service, and he got turned down every time on account of his psoriasis. Now today they have medicine enough to cure that.
Yeah.
But he went into Boston to the Leahy Clinic, and they gave him one type of medicine. And they said, when that's gone, come back and we'll give you another one. And that was what they did. It was just experimenting. He was one of the guinea pigs for the situation. And then he got turned down again. He never refused to go in the service, but he always felt that the Navy was the place to go, though.
Yeah.
And that's what he said to you. You've always got a bed to sleep in the Navy.
He worked long hours there, didn't he?
Oh yes, yeah. He worked 7 days a week most of the time. Yeah, but then in those days you didn't even earn much at 7 days a week. But they were so busy and everything, and they wanted him, so he worked about 7 days a week.
Yeah, and he was a welder.
Yeah, he was a welder in there, in the Boston Navy Yard. So then, because when we went on our honeymoon, gas was rationed. You had your coupon books, and what could you do with your coupon books? You had to use them for what you had to have them for, because he had to get from Stoughton into Boston. So we had our Uncle Chester took our bicycle into Boston for us, and we shipped it to Philadelphia. And we picked it up in Philadelphia, and we biked for a whole week around Philadelphia on the bicycle. And some of the places we stayed, because even we were going for the cheapest way we could go, and even then we went to a hotel. We had to stay in hotels most of the time around Philadelphia, and they would put the tandem in the laundry room. Many hotels just put it in the laundry room for us.
Yeah.
So that was safe. But we had quite an experience that way, and we saw a lot of Philadelphia, which was a nice experience to see. Maybe better than some people that went on a tour, because we could stop when we wanted to.
Yeah.
So we always had wanted to go to Europe. Daddy had been, when he got out of high school, he went over to Denmark, and he always hoped I could get over and see Denmark and Norway. He thought they were marvelous countries. And he went with a youth hostel group. So he had always biked a lot. So we decided that we'd try and save our money. So we finally got enough saved, so we went over to Europe. And our plane fare over to Europe was $1,000 round trip for two of us. And we went over there and stayed at in youth hostels almost all the time we were over there. But we went over with the idea of biking when we were biking, see, all the time.
That was 72,
72.
and I was over there at the same time.
You were, yes. Yeah. And we thought we'd be able to get a lady's bicycle without any problem. So before we went, we were biking every Saturday or Sunday when he had a day off, all around Clearwater, Palm Harbor, Dunedin. We'd go about 75 miles to 100 every day on the bicycle. So, we were in good shape, see, both of us. That was a lot of biking.
And how old were you then?
50 years old.
50, yeah.
Around 50. Yeah, because I was 50, well, I was 55. He was killed in 74. So I was 52.
Mm-hmm.
But Grandma and I had biked. Daddy's mother, she and I had biked up through the White Mountains together. Right after I was married, the two of us biked through there. So I've always biked all my life.
Yeah.
And Dad had too. But we couldn't get a bicycle over there that was a woman's bicycle that had speeds on it. And I didn't feel I could ride a man's bicycle. So that's how we got into the mopeds. And we bought the mopeds for, I think it was something like $100 a piece with the insurance. And there was enough insurance to cover the length of time we were going to be there a month. And that was wonderful, because the insurance covered it all but the last 2 days we were going to be there. So we turned up, we went all over. And we landed in Luxembourg, and we went through Germany and Holland and Switzerland, Denmark, Norway. So we had a wonderful biking trip. And then we went into, when we left our mopeds, we went into France and walked around the city in France.
In Paris.
In Paris, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was quite an experience to walk in Paris and go down that big, wide street in Paris, and everything. And then we got on the train, and we had an awful job to find somebody to ship the mopeds back to this country, which in a way I wish we hadn't been able to, but we did. And we finally found a company that had a ship that would bring them to Tampa for us. So we left the mopeds with as much baggage as we took as much baggage as we could, because we bought a lot of stuff, of course, for all you kids to bring back and all that. So we left the mopeds and went into Paris then, see. So we didn't have too much luggage at that time. But it was quite an experience over there. And that was in 72. We came back from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was quite a thing we had. And all the time you were over there, we never met up with you. That was such a strange thing. Because you had stayed at some of the places that we went to, or you came afterwards, but we never met. Because didn't have cell phones in those days anyway. Didn't have telephones or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so strange, because we had hoped we'd, just meet up with you when you were over.
Yeah.
But it just didn't work out that way.
No.
No?
Tell me about the house on Pearl Street.
Yeah,
How did you end up with the house? And it was built,
Well,
wasn't it?
it was built. It was 2 years old when we bought it, and we rented a house up on Morton Street, a 2-bedroom house, and had a attic upstairs that had a bed in it we could use for a guest room. It was a nice little house, and it looked very much like Auntie's house looked. It was that type house, you know, and they were nice people that rented it to us, and we had that house there for until we were looking for a place to buy because we felt it was foolish to be paying rent. Oh, I can't remember what we paid for rent, but it was very little. Guess what we paid for the house on our house on Pearl Street? $6,400.
Wow.
Was all we paid for that house. And that house was only 2 years old, and it had an extra lot of land. There was a space in between the two houses, and there was enough so you could have built another house on it. But we bought that house for $6,400. We only put a $2,000 mortgage on it. Daddy had saved enough so we had the money to put down. Because, see, he was 4 years older than I was, and he'd been working on the Navy yard. Never wasted a penny. And so we paid all down. And in 2 years, we had the house paid free and clear. And then, of course, Janet was born up on Morton Street, at the house up there. I had the same doctor delivered her that delivered me.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he said that was such a hard delivery. That was the last one he ever delivered was Janet. He said that was the end of his career too. So he ended his career by delivering her, and I can hear him hollering, "Bansimer, check the time. It'll either be today or tomorrow," because she was born on the 19th of July, 1 minute before midnight. And "Bansimer, check the time," he says, "it'll be today or tomorrow." And he had the nurse with him that I think had worked with him when Mother was. She was an old lady too. And so I had her at the house there. And then I had a woman come and stay at the house, and she slept upstairs in the attic and stayed at the house for 2 weeks. So that was the old way of doing things,
Yeah.
you know?
Tell me about when Dad's car got run over by the horses. He had a convertible, and the horse
that
from
was the
next
great
door.
convertible, yeah. That hasn't stuck in my mind as a big
Really, I
thing.
thought you told me once that
Did I?
he came to your house in his new convertible, and the house and the.
Oh, that was before we were married. That I know now. That was my uncle's horses that lived next door to my mother, and he used to come out weekends to my mother's house and stay overnight when he had Saturdays and Sundays. And my uncle lived next door, and they had horses, and that horses came through and went wild because they were trying to chase him. And it did make quite a mess of that convertible. But of course, in those days, you just got it fixed, and it wasn't that much to get everything fixed. But we didn't earn that much.
Yeah.
But he used to come out every weekend if he had it off, instead because I couldn't go into Boston. So he used to come out and stay at Mother's, and my sister was married, and the bedroom was upstairs. See, so that was it. I'd forgotten about that horse coming through. Yeah, but that was Uncle Herbert's horses that came through. Yeah.
How did Grandpa get involved in the printing business?
His father was in the print. His father owned the business. And as a young boy, he went and didn't finish high school even. My daddy never finished high school. But
Your dad.
my dad, yeah. But he went in with his father. Yeah, and his father's name was Herbert Mossman, and my father's name was Herbert Nahum Mossman, and that's how he started and took the name of Nahum, Nahum. It's the book of the Bible. So he took that name, and he took the business over when Grandpa still worked for quite a while after Dad was working for him, but when he retired, more or less, well, he was old. He was old. He probably wasn't as old as I am now. When he retired, I know he wasn't, but he was old, and in those days it was old, you know. Now today, 87 isn't that old.
Yeah.
There's so many people in here 87, it's hard to believe. It really is. Yeah.
What was it? How
So
did
then he took his brother in business with him. And that wasn't the best deal always because the brother just he didn't work out quite so good. That was Uncle Frank.
yeah.
They got along, but it wasn't as happy a thing as it could have been. I don't think.
Then after the war, Dad started to work for the newspaper.
Well,
Grandpa's newspaper.
yeah. Mm-hmm. See, Gramp went. Well, my father, he was unhappy working in the Navy Yard, really, and he didn't want to go back and forth all the time. So my father took him down there and taught him to be a hand compositor, and then he put him on the linotype too, and that's how he got doing the linotype work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How did Nana and Grandpa end up getting a cottage on Onset Island?
Well, now let me see. I don't know how they went down and rented a cottage. I don't know. There was someone that they knew that had a place down there, and they went down and rented it. And then when this one came available that he bought that house. They bought that house, of course, and had it. And they decided they'd buy it because Dad was going to retire. He hadn't retired when they bought it.
So you didn't have that. You weren't there when you were a little girl.
Oh no. No, that was just of their last number of years that they had that. And they went down and stayed the whole summer. They loved it down there. Dad loved to fish, go out with this little rowboat. And everything on that island was carried over in a rowboat to build every house on that island. Now that is really something. Because there were some nice houses in there. And, all the equipment and everything in the house, everything had to come over in a rowboat. Most of them only had one average small-sized rowboat. That's all Gramp had was one. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have a motor at first to get him over there. He had to row over. But in that going over, he could go around and stop right at his house, whereas some of the places had to carry everything all the way into they landed a dock, and then they had to carry everything to build the whole houses over there. And they say it hasn't changed too much.
What kind of vacations did you go on with your parents, with Nana and Grandpa? Did you ever take vacations?
We didn't have too many vacations, no. We didn't go places, no. In those days, you just didn't go anyplace.
Yeah.
No, we didn't. I can't. When I was in secretarial school in Boston, after I graduated from high school, I can remember going with them down to the Carolinas one year, and they took this other girlfriend and I down with them to Carolina, and that was an excursion. Whoa, that was a big excursion to go that far. Yeah.
Well, you and Dad did a lot of traveling, though, didn't you?
Oh yes, we did a lot. Oh yes, we did a lot after you kids got up. Yeah, we did a lot of traveling, but we did it always the cheap way. We took, it was like when we were in Europe, we bought bread and cheese and stuff like that and ate it on the side of the road. And we did that a lot. But we stayed at youth hostels when we went. Yeah, and when we were first married, we used to, before we had either of you children, we went down to Rhode Island to a hostel down there of a weekend. If we had a weekend off, and we'd bike down from Stoughton down to Rhode Island and stay at a hostel. And we stayed in a barn up in the hayloft, It was a lot of fun. But today, nobody would lower themselves to do something like that, I guess. I don't know. But we had a lot of fun out of it. And we enjoyed the biking, and that's why we wanted to get to Europe. We figured we could bike around Europe. And, of course, on the mopeds, we did see a lot more than we would have had we just gone on bicycles. Because we couldn't have gone as many miles if we'd bicycled, or as many countries as we did. But that was really an extra bonus to be able to go there. Wish they never had it, but hindsight's no good. You never know what's coming. That's all.
Well, what was Dad's life like growing up in Southington, Connecticut?
They used to go to a beach down there a lot, and they camped in a tent. They were great for camping and going out like that. Yeah, and of course, Grandma and I bicycled before I was married all up through the White Mountains. She was 50 years old, and I thought, oh my heavens, 50 years old. She was so old, when we were married. And she and I went for a week's vacation, when I had a week's vacation from the office I worked at in Boston. And it was quite an experience to go with her. She was a good sport. She really was. Unbelievable sport. Gramp, he didn't go for that kind of stuff. No. He'd rather stay home than he would have gone on that. But she and I had a marvelous time. The summer before we were married, we did that. And that was something. Because she and Daddy had taken the tandem all through the White Mountains, too, at one time. Mm-hmm. So she was a good sport, and she was a good healthy, but I know she didn't live. I don't know how old she was when she died, but she was in her 70s someplace, I guess.
Well, Dad's father, my grandfather, he was a volunteer fireman,
Yes.
right? But what did he?
He was a mechanic,
Tool maker?
tool maker. That's what it was a tool maker. Yeah, at a big company in New Haven. Yeah, mm-hmm, Connecticut. And his brother lives in not in Southington, on Hartford. Yeah, and I still hear from his children.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Peg and Bill, and I still hear from them.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's rather nice. They sent me a picture of their, that was in the paper, of their 62nd anniversary, wedding anniversary, and so forth. I call them once in a while. So it's a nice to have a little interest in that side too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's quite a. We had a lot of experiences, and then we took you out west with us one time, and then it really. We've gone a lot, but never had to spend much money doing it. But it was a lot of money in those days for us.
Yeah.
That was the thing. We didn't go in any style ever.
Did you like the idea of coming to Florida?
Well, I had never driven down. I had been down here, but only once, because Grandma and Grandpa Bansema lived. They came down and had a trailer down here, and I had been down and seen them, and because they were all gung ho for Florida, and I can remember my mother when I told her Thanksgiving Day. I spoiled that dinner all right. That we were seriously considering moving to Florida. Oh, she thought the world had come to an end. She'd never see us again and everything else. And of course, my sister lived next door to her, and we lived down the street. I always had lived after we were married in Stoughton. Oh, nobody moved away. In those days, people never left the home base. They always stayed right there. And I told my mother that we had decided to come to Florida. And she thought that it was the influence of Daddy's folks that made us want to come. And in a way, it wasn't. But he thought of the son. They told him at the Leahy Clinic that if he would take this medicine for his psoriasis, then come back when it's gone and give him something different. And sun lamp was the only thing that would help at all. So we felt that maybe the sun down here would do the trick, and it did a lot of it. But it didn't cure it, because there still wasn't medicines enough back in those days, you see. But today they can keep that pretty well under control, I think, that psoriasis. And in a way, someone thinks it's hereditary, and I don't know what it is, because Glenn has had it. Mm-hmm.
What was I like as really young?
Oh, you were always a good boy. You were always a good boy. Never any problem. You never caused us any problem at all. No, you didn't. No, you just, more or less, maybe we let you do your own thing, I don't know. But we always encouraged whatever you wanted to do. We tried to.
Yeah, I had so much freedom when I was
Sure.
a young boy. I used to let me go everywhere.
Sure. Well, It was, in those days, it wasn't as dangerous as it is today. That's
Yeah.
the thing of it. Today, it's dangerous. But well, we always taught you not to go with a stranger or anything else, and you minded us. You're a good boy. That was all. Both you kids were very easy to bring up. But my mother thought when we told her at Thanksgiving we were moving to Florida, she never would see the children again. And oh, she couldn't imagine not having me around, all that, because Eleanor lived right next door with her 2 children, see. And listen, they were never as good as you kids were. But we told her that we were going to. And so she had to accept it, that's all. There was nothing else she could do but accept it. And Daddy came down, let me see, he came down in January, February, something like that, because the job opening came. He got it by letter and telephone. So that was pretty good to get a job down here. And the pay was better than he was getting up there from Gramp. So we came down here, and he came down, and he stayed where the Gray Moss Inn is today.
Yeah.
There was
Across from the Fort Harrison.
across from the
Hotel.
Fort Harrison. They've torn down now,
Yeah.
and the Scientologists have it. But he stayed in there and went to work. And he didn't have a car. Says that he could walk to work from there, see. These are the days that didn't have all the extra stuff. And so he came down, and when I told the school that we were going to take you out of school, they said, well, it would be smart if you leave in April, because they will have completed most of their work for the year then, and then they will have time to get acquainted with the children in that area and the way around. So that's why I drove down alone. I never had driven over the road to Florida in my life. Never had ridden in Florida in a car. So that was a big experience. And I drove down, and when I put you kids in school, right off, we found that the schools down here were ahead of Stoughton schools. And that surprises people. And they supposedly had a very good reputation for schools up there.
I remember Grandpa telling me about the time he saw his first automobile.
Oh, yeah.
But when you were a young girl,
Oh,
I mean, let me see, when were you born? 1919.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So even automobiles at that
They
time were kind of scarce.
Oh, yes. Gramp had one for business to go back and forth that the Canton Publishing Company paid for the expenses on it, and that was it was his car more or less because he owned the business. And he had that to go from Stoughton to Canton in. And we used to go every Sunday to see his father that lived almost across the street from the shop at that time. And he lived with his sister. His sister came. Grandma Mossman died during the World War with pneumonia.
World War One?
Two.
Two, okay, yeah.
And she, that's how I got the name of Adeline for my middle name. That was her first name. And that's how I got my middle name, was Adeline. And his sister came to live with him after that. And we used to go down, and you kids got so bored going down every Sunday down there. Oh, it was pathetic. But we had to go visit Grandpa every Sunday. So we went to visit Grandpa. You see, my folks were right close by, but that was the only one Daddy had. Well, he had sisters too.
Yeah, that'd be my great-grandpa. I don't remember that at all.
No, you don't remember going down there. You were
No.
little.
Yeah.
You were small when Grandpa Mossman died, yeah. So he died of cancer from smoking so much and chewing tobacco.
Huh.
And he had part of his jaw taken out and all that from cancer.
That's my great-grandfather.
Yeah, mm-hmm, yeah. So needless to say, your grandfather never smoked. He saw what happened to his father. Yeah, he never did. Or he did smoke up to a point, and then he stopped when his father had to have that done. That was enough to make him stop. But he didn't have it done till a few years before he died, but his mouth was gone with cancer. So, I don't know, all these people today that have their cigarettes and everything in their mouth, you just wonder how they're going to make out in all their life. But we went down and we had an open car to go down. It was an open side curtains on the car, you know. And we'd go, my sister and I, every Sunday down there to visit with him. And of course, it never was too much fun because it was just two old folks as far as we were concerned, you know. But we did it. We had to do it. That was it. We had to go every week to see him. Yeah. So it was, and we'd stop and my father, we stopped on the way down and we're going to pick some flowers in the field someplace. And I can almost hear my father today say, God, get those kids back in the car. There was a big snake there. And that was, you know, was just out in the country from Stoughton to Canton. That was a trip. That was a trip when we were kids to do that. Yeah.
That reminds me.
And to go like from here to Clearwater was all it was. Yeah. You know?
That reminds me, when I was young, I picked up a snake.
Oh, yeah. Dumb kid. Didn't hurt you though.
No, remember I threw it. Remember I threw a snake?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I'd forgotten about that one now.
Oh, I threw a snake and it went down the front of your dress, didn't it?
Yeah. I don't know how I could have forgot that either. But that was just a kid trick, you know, more or less. You know, you didn't know what it was, that it could have been harmful, I don't think. Yeah, there was another lady down there. I said, oh, did I hold you up? She says, no. I looked because it was shut off. And I looked to see if it was available. And I always say that this one has a history to it.
A lot of sewing stuff.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to get something made up because they gave me so many miles of material from the library hospital. So, this is how I make the quilts now. That's when I made material I cut up. I took all the scraps that were left and making the quilts out of them for the hospital. So, a neonatal baby, one that probably weighs 1.5 pounds or so. The little booties and the little hat.
Oh my God.
They said the hat had to be 8 inches around, and this one's 9 inches around. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Now with my wrist, since I did my wrist, I can do this type of knitting, but I can't do too much else. The heaviest stuff I can't handle. It makes it ache too much. So I'm going on more of this little one stuff. With this wrist, I can't do much of anything without spilling it all. So, I think I had 35 cards sent to me. I've given to me from in here and so forth. Yeah.
Dad used to take on odd jobs too.
Oh,
didn't
yes.
he?
Oh, he was always handy. He could do everything. You know, like, well, you know, he could do electrical, he could do plumbing, he could do carpentry. And his father was very handy. He learned a lot from his father. And I said, I think you learned a lot from your daddy by hanging around him in the garage, too. Because you do learn when you see them do things, you pick it up. because you can do a lot. But you never did anything with a paintbrush.
Really?
Nope. You never colored. You couldn't color good as a little child. You could.
Oh.
4 or 5 years old, you couldn't take a pencil in your hand and color any good. Your sister was trying to show you, and you were up in years. Well, she was. Well, there's only 4 years between you, 3, 4 years. But she was. When you were in the vicinity of 10 years old. That was when I went into the meat market on Drew Street and said to him, "I've got a son that can print better than that." And he said, "Well, send him over." And that's how you got your start, really. But you weren't coloring worth a hoot even then. But you could letter pretty good for some strange reason. The lettering, because you lettered Janet's music books that she, her bags that she carried her music for Wilma Chastain. She used to play for them every Sunday night. And of course, you used to play the saxophone some Sunday nights.
Yeah.
Too. But that was really, and then from then on, and the second place I went and said the same thing, was over to Town and Country. And I went in there, and you had just done the awning. Remember that big awning you did for Cleveland
Yeah, for the
Hassel?
florist, yeah.
On the living room floor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You didn't want to do it out in the garage, so we let you do it on the floor. Don't ask me why, but we did. See, that we didn't spoil your tall, of course. But you did that for Cleveland Hassel on the floor.
Yeah.
That big one. And when I went into Town and Country, I said to them, "Oh, my son can do better lettering than that. Your signs are."
Yeah, supermarket.
Supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "He's also done the awning for Cleveland Hassel Florist." And he could go over and see that, of course. But he didn't go over. He'd apparently seen it before. And he said, "Send him over." And those first signs, do you know what you got for those? Do you remember?
Well, I used to get 25 cents.
That was the
Sign.
first one. You got 25 cents.
Yeah.
But when Town and Country,
You
what
used to
did
get $1.25
Yeah,
a piece.
they gave you $1.25 a piece, and you thought you were a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, because I did 10 or 12 of them a week.
Sure,
That was
sure.
a pretty good thing.
Oh, yeah, that was big stuff. And so Daddy said to you, "Well, it looks to me as though you're going in business, Roger." Little did he know what we could produce, what you've produced. And he said, "We're going to have to get some things, business cards made." So he had them down at the Clearwater Sun make business cards. And I swear that was your start in getting going. Yeah. Because we sat for many a show taking pictures, trying to sell your pictures. If we sold one for $10, it was an exciting thing, you know.
Yeah, my paintings.
Your paintings, yeah. But it was, Daddy took you over there and said you had to buy your own paint, your paper, and your brushes. And he'd make the board for you. And that was your start. And you know, I say to someone, "Well, you know, he's learned how to handle money because we made him as a child handle money."
Well, I used to have the drawing, that big 4x8 foot
Yeah.
board in my bedroom where I
That's
used
right.
to paint
That was the one he
signs.
made then for the
Yeah.
sign. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to believe that you could have accomplished what you have even in all these years. You've been.
And then we got into the old cars.
Yes, because you started that because you came home and said, "Can I buy a car?" And your father says, "Well, if you got some money, you can." And you had saved some money. Yep, you learned how to handle a dollar. Dad put it in you how to handle a dollar. And so you you started out with your antique car, and then he got the bug that he wanted one, and we came up here to Palm Harbor and bought our Model T Ford and drove it home. That was an experience and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, that was the hardest thing I had to part with when Daddy died, was the Model T Ford. It really was. To see that go down the street, oh. But you said you have seen that since, or you thought you did. Over in Orlando or something one time, you thought you saw it over there.
I've seen one like it. I don't
Yeah.
know if it was the same
No.
one.
Yeah. But you don't see many of those around now.
No.
But when you think of all the times I drove that Model A Ford of yours, when you were in college, down at Ringling's, I used that as a second car.
Yeah.
And then I would get down, and the lady that lived next door had a car, and I would drive her in her car, but I drove the yellow car down to the nursing home and left it, and then I drove her car and took her around in her car. Yeah. So there's been a lot of things happen from a small experience.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't a really easy car to drive, and the brakes were, mechanical brakes, and
Oh, yeah, but in those days there wasn't that much traffic.
Yeah.
Listen, I've just had the new brakes put in my car here, and they were having a whistle sound. Oh, and Rogers immediately had it taken and had new pads put in it for me and everything, because he said it wasn't safe. Not the way people travel today, but the way they traveled in those days, there wasn't the traffic around.
Yeah.
It was safe. I drove from there, McKinley Street, down to the nursing home by Fort Harrison Hotel. And that was about all I used to drive. It was, but used to take it down to school once in a while.
not very often.
No,
Sometimes.
but it was no. When I think of the number of times you went out and thumbed your way, and Daddy and I just hated to see you do it every time. But I guess you only had one or two bad experiences.
Yeah, I hitchhiked a lot. I used to hitchhike from
Mm.
Jacksonville home on the
Yeah.
weekends too.
I know you did.
Mayport.
And you went up to Nana's on it
Yeah,
when you were in the service.
I've hitchhiked thousands of miles.
But today you wouldn't pick anyone up, would you?
No.
No, it's not safe. No, what a different world it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived in one world, but you lived in a different one, but it was much better than it is today, I think. Yeah, really, I think it is. But you know, it meant an awful lot to Nana and Grandpa to have you come up there every weekend. And it meant a lot to you, too, because you had some place to go and you couldn't make it to home.
Dad had a 16 millimeter camera,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a real heavy thing, and he
Was it?
lugged that all around Europe on his
I
bicycle.
don't know what happened to all that stuff when I moved.
But that's all gone now.
Yes, yes.
All the film is deteriorated.
Oh, it would have, yes, yeah.
Yeah. I wish I still had some of that film. But
Oh, I know it. Yeah. Yeah. Did you get the film in the camera?
But it was all bad.
It was all bad, sure,
deteriorated.
because it was up overhead in the garage for years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 6 years before I moved.
So he liked to do filming though.
Oh, he
didn't
loved it. Oh, yes, he would have been so thrilled with what you do. Oh, he'd have been thrilled to pieces with it all, Yeah. And I often think what he said once, well, that boy's going to head someplace. That's what he said to me. He says, that boy's going to head someplace. And you sure have. Yeah. Yeah.
How many years have you been working for Boston Market?
I've been with Boston Market for 7.5 years. It'll be 8 years this Christmas. And how I got the job, you know how I got the job? I was playing Mrs. Santa Claus at Wendy's. I was working at Wendy's, and I'd been there about 3 months. And I said to them, would you like to have me play Mrs. Santa Claus at Christmas time? Oh, that would be wonderful, they said. And so I said, fine. And I came home and I thought it over a couple nights. When I went back the next day to work over at Wendy's, I was just in their dining room, say, too. And when I went back, I said to them, well, how about having it at night, too? Because you'd have more kids come in at night. Well, she'd have to inquire about it. They didn't want to pay me any more money. They didn't want to pay me at night, too. And I said, well, I'll find somebody else that will. And that was the first place I went, was Boston Market. Why I went there, I don't know. But I went down there and went in, and this man, Larry McDowell, was manager then, and he interviewed me, and I had a picture of myself in the outfit that I'd had at McDonald's. And I told him that I was doing it at Wendy's, and would he be interested in having me at night? Oh, he sure would. And he was the one that hired me at night. And it is the only Boston Market in the United States that has a hostess in it now. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
But he hired me as Mrs. Santa Claus, and I was for 5 nights a week or something like that. It was 7 nights a week anyway. But that was 7.5 years ago. And he called me in the office after about 4 or 5 days of playing Mrs. Santa Claus, and he said, will you leave Wendy's and come here permanent? And because he had told me to wear and he said, and then wear your own clothes and do whatever you want in the dining room. It's your dining room. And they have played that ever since, that I can do whatever I want in the dining room. And the VP told me when I first got there, the first time he came on from Colorado, he had heard what Mrs. Santa Claus was and what I was doing when he came on a few months after Christmas. And he said to me, oh, I'm so glad to meet you. He says, we've had a lot of calls about you. And he said, you can't leave us until you're 100. And every year he came on, 4 years, the 4th year he came on, and he said the same thing to me, how are we getting towards the 100? I says, well, really, Terry, that's stupid. I said it just like that to him. I looked him square in the eye and I said, Terry, that's stupid, 100. And he said, all right, I'll drop it to 95. And in 2 years after that, that man retired at 72 years old. And I wanted to send him a card, to call him on the phone. And I thought, no, I better leave well enough alone. I didn't know how he'd take it. So I ignored it, really.
And you're still working at 87.
At 87, I'm still going. And the man that has now, he was, at one point, this Joe, was a manager of the particular store where I'm working at. He started out as a meat cutter. Then he went up as a assistant manager. Then he went up as a manager of the store. Then he went on as a district manager, and now he's a regional manager of the whole area, all of Florida. And he has pulled up the 95 business, and he tells me I can't leave till I'm 95. And I tell him I'm going to 90, and then I'll go year by year if I can make 3 more years. But so he has told me to come in only at 2 hours a night, and I think he saw it was getting to be a little too much for me. So I go in now only 2 nights a week, 2 hours a night, but 7 nights a week I go in. And I sit down. He said, sit down, don't stand up all the time, and if you get tired, go home. And I said, well, if it's not busy, then I'll go home. So that's what I do. And if I can do that, I'm hoping to make 90. But I don't know. Because with the 2 artificial knees, that's one thing that makes it a little bit more difficult to stand and walk. And, you feel them. They're not your own knees. And then everybody that lives here at St. Mark, their legs are weak. They're worn out. So that's what it is, I guess. So I'm going for 90. I don't know whether I'll make it or not, but I'm going to try.
Your hands are really arthritic, aren't they?
Oh, they sure are.
Gosh.
Yeah. And they now, these 2 fingers ache worse if I don't keep this on, since my wrist has deteriorated from all the knitting I've done. And I don't wear this all the time, but I find that it helps to support it a little.
Yeah.
And I do knit some, because I found I can't do. You see, they really are. They're really out there.
Wow.
They go, which way am I going? But nevertheless, it's just part of it. And that's from all the knitting this is mainly the knitting I've done that's done it. But these 2 fingers have got, since the wrist bone deteriorated, it has made these 2 fingers quite numb.
How many things have you made for All Children's Hospital? And
Well, I made over 1,000 pair of booties for All Children's Hospital, and then I stopped counting. And I've stopped going down there because it was too much to drive down and back. But I made jackets and bonnets down there for them too, and blankets. I did a lot of stuff for them. But then I've gone to Morton Plant, and Morton Plant, I have not kept track of how much I've done at Morton Plant, but I know I've gone into several hundred pairs of booties for All Children, for Morton Plant Hospital. And I haven't made a cap to go with each pair, because it's easier to do the booties, and a lot of people don't make them small enough for the little babies. And I went down there, and they gave me a list of things and sizes that they would like to have. And they gave me some directions. That's where I got the directions for these booties I make. They're knit instead of crocheted, and I find it's easier to knit because I can throw the thread with my left hand and just pick it off with my right finger, and it doesn't move my wrist.
Yeah.
I can throw the thread with my left hand over the needle and then take it off with this right hand, and I don't move my wrist. So it makes it slower, and I have to keep, now my hand is hurting the arthritis so much, I have to stick my one finger out stiff and hold my needles that way. So I can't do as much as I used to, but I can't expect to.
Yeah.
That's all. I'm trying not to be a hog at doing everything. I do enjoy doing it, and I don't enjoy just sitting. So, and I don't enjoy, I wish I liked to read more, but I don't.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a reader, and I never was.
Well,
So,
shall we go
oh,
have some
right.
lunch?
Oh, that would be a good idea. Oh, well, that's very sweet of you. You know, it is kind of nice, though, Roger, to get something like that to have. You know, I really appreciate your thought and wanting to do something like that, because it is. There's a lot of things I wish I had of just Daddy and I, things that Daddy and I did.
Yeah.
But I have nice memories, and I have that book that I have written of our trip to Europe, and I think there's one of the Mexico trip, but that was it. So we're gonna take every day as it comes, and be glad we've got every day. When I get up to 10 years, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask them if they'll give me a free dinner every day. I think in 10 years they ought to. But that doesn't say they will. Especially sometimes after I work, and then I get to come back and I'll say, oh, I wish I was at 6 to know what day I've been in that nursing home long enough.